Thank you all for joining us for the NACE Career Readiness Competencies Workshop. Joining us today are Eileen McGarry, Executive Director of Career Services, and Dr. Cecilia Maldonado, Associate Vice Provost for Workforce Development. They're going to share with us the NACE 8 career competencies and how you can develop them for yourself. So I'm going to hand it over to them to get us started.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Cecilia here. It's good to be with you here and virtually.
And I'm Eileen McGarry. Welcome.
Yes. Feel free to ask questions at any point in time. So learning outcomes, by participating in this workshop, you will learn about the NACE 8 career competencies and how you can develop them. Identify which competencies are your strengths and which require development. Consider which transferable skills are most relevant to your field of study and future industry.
So let's get started and we'll kind of dive in a little bit and explain what NACE competencies really are. What are we talking about? So NACE is the National Association of Colleges and Employers. And many career development professionals that work with college students are connected to this organization and many of its regions. It's created as an organization that focuses not just on what career development professionals are thinking in the field, but what employers are looking at in the field. And so a lot of employer intelligence is constantly brought to the table, and we're talking about often major employers, leading employers, but as we move into the 21st century, all kinds of employers that might tap the market. Over the years, as we all know, the market's changed a lot. Needs have changed. We were even having spoke in a seminar today about how we're in a whole different 21st century that education wasn't necessarily even built for the students that are coming today. But NACE is trying to look out for how is it that we need to think about preparing people for their eventual professions after education, and how do we use this intelligence to inform what we do along the way. So employers and career services professionals and other stakeholders have spent a lot of time thinking about competencies, because when we go out and survey employers, they come back and say, this is really what I need. This is really important. And from there, they're surveyed year after year, and sometimes these things change and shift or new things come into play. Very recently, there has been a task force that's looked at this again and really redefined what we mean by these things. So we're going to walk you through. If you want to move one more slide. So you'll see a basic outline of what the key top 8 are that nationwide we're focused on. So just to start, I'll walk you through a little bit of them, and then we'll have a little more deeper discussion about them and even some reflection. So first of all, career and self-development, which I think of as sort of the core of what we all students to focus on. Sometimes we think that's supposed to just come naturally, right? We're going to get our education, get our credentials, and then we're just supposed to magically jobs happen. But without career and self-development, we don't advance. We don't do the right kinds of reflection. We don't know how to present ourselves. I mean, half what we do in the workplace is how we brand and how we present our brand. And that's really the crux of career and self-development. And it's basically being focused on self-awareness and the idea of continually developing yourself and looking and how to look for and navigate career opportunities. Yeah, jump in there.
Sure. And this is a competency that I believe we need to teach students how to navigate and how to what kinds of behaviors do they need to do in order to be career focused and ways that they can develop themselves. And it requires, Eileen said, it requires a sense of knowing oneself and what one's strengths are, being really honest with yourselves about what you're good at, what you're not, and understanding where you want to go and comparing what it is that you need to be, how you need to present yourself for a particular job and compare it to what you do, and then fill in the gap. So it's like a gap analysis from a business perspective and looking at your own self. So career, and I know this is really small, we borrowed these from NACE and we can change them. So we have a handout that we can share afterwards. And so career and self-development is really about proactively developing oneself and one's career through continual personal and professional learning, awareness of one's strengths and weaknesses, navigation of career opportunities, and networking to build relationships within and without one's organization. So when you hear that definition, what behaviors what behaviors would demonstrate that you are aware of yourself and you are proactively trying to develop your career awareness? Behaviors.
Some examples
Yes.
come to mind.
A rich example, I don't know if people out there can hear me. Okay, a rich example I had in my career was when I took a job overseas in Southeast Asia. And suddenly I'm taken out of the American context, placed into Bangkok, Thailand, working as the only American in a completely Thai company, which is now not coming from the American, Western European, Judeo-Christian base, but now based upon Buddhism. And when you're suddenly removed from America and you are the lone American in a foreign outpost, you see America as this distant, giant country, culture, power that has a lot of influence, but it's out there. And now you're here. So and therefore, as situations would arise that I had to deal with people and problems and how the culture worked, and I approached it as an American, it became very evident to me that's not how they do it. So when you are removed from your American context, you see a lot as to how Americans act and behave, and the good, the bad, the strong, the weak parts of it, and why it can happen. So therefore, you had to become much more, by being removed from this American context, it forced me to face why, as an American, why I behaved the way I did.
How did you remedy that? So how were you able to succeed in that environment?
Primarily, at first, I lived in I didn't live in the foreign zone. I lived in the Thai community. And I lived amongst Thais, with Thais, worked with Thais, socialized with Thais. And the other thing was that, again, a big lesson, I started, essentially became a practicing Buddhist. Go to the temple, talk to the monks, and it was great. They were great because they all wanted to learn English, so I taught them English and they taught me Thai, and they gave me a lot of stuff to eat. So it was great food. But
So immersion.
yeah, exactly. But I had to dive in intentionally. But it was a safe environment. It was great. It was very safe to do it that way. A similar experience I had, again, let's go to my military experience. In 1990, this is when the United Nations wanted to put Cambodia back together after 25 years of civil war. And so and America was only allowed to send 16, since we were one of the people that created the problem there. We were only allowed to send 16 people there. Well, I got to look, I was one of them. And so now suddenly I was sent as part of a United Nations military observer team. And I was sent out to this remote province called Bantie Vientiane. And now suddenly I was dealing with, on my team, it was commanded by an officer from France, and I had teammates from Russia, China, and Cameroon. And as we as a team would go to try to figure out what's going on and solve problems out there, again, it became very evident as an American, especially as an American military officer, you're faced with a problem. Okay, let's define the problem. Let's come up with a solution. Let's start working towards a plan. Whereas the guy from Cameroon is kind of like, no, let's kind of like talk to everybody for about a week and kind of think about it. That's what we want to do. And that was similar, very, very different approaches. Now, the beauty of it was that this collection of characters having to work together as a team, we essentially buffered each other from our excesses and came up with pretty good solutions. But again, I had to remove myself from the American context to realize how those American traits deal with you. Now, again, I realize the audience we've got here, you're living, working, born, raised in America, and probably going to stay there. But if you want to learn a lot about who you are and how you behave, get yourself out of America.
I think we're in a very team-based workplace. Well, a lot of workplaces have teams, and those teams are geographically dispersed. So that is the value of one of the competencies is that here teamwork is, but appreciating diversity and respecting other people's context, right, and how they show up to work is a skill. Can't assume, like you said, as an American, that we know we're the best, we know the best, and we're better than anyone else. So I think even working in America, that there are companies that they're worldwide, they're global, and so you're going to be working with. So, I mean, I think having that awareness is definitely important.
And I think also how that relates to the career and self-development is actually seeking out challenging opportunities and those experiences like you described. Like, obviously you didn't say no.
Right.
And that's what it is. It's taking risks and stretching, showing that you're stretching to learn new things. That's a big piece of the development. Participate and challenging yourself.
Anyone else want to chime in on behaviors that show that you are actively developing? Yes.
Asking questions,
Okay.
and being receptive to feedback.
Out in the virtual space.
Well, if you want, type in the chat, or you can just unmute yourself and give us any feedback.
If not, we'll move on. All right, communication. Communication is extremely, extremely important. And, you know, we all forced to work in a virtual space, and communication was critical to being able to transition, right, from in-person. And while in-person communication is just as important, it became super critical during the pandemic. So being able to clearly and effectively exchange information, ideas, facts, and perspectives with people inside and outside of an organization. What are some behaviors that you can, you would be able to describe yourself, say on a resume, that you're a good communicator? What are some statements in behavioral forms or terms that you can use?
So kind of as we start asking these questions, so part of the reason is even our organizations have gone to the length of defining what these look like. We don't want to have nebulous things out there that nobody understands, because they're actually looking for performance indicators. How do we evaluate if people have the skills and competencies we want them to have? So there's been some work even behind this. What do the behaviors actually look like? And that's why we want you to be thinking about and pulling out some of these examples.
In addition, even when you go and interview, a lot of the interviews are behavioral based. And so employers will ask you, tell me a time that you used communication skills to solve a problem, or to manage an issue, or to manage a customer that was angry. And you have to be able to talk about it from a behavioral perspective. So you can't just say, hey, I'm a great communicator. Okay, tell me how. And how effective are you? Tell me about what my ex used to tell me, STAR. The situation, what you did about it, the actions you took, and the result. So always present it in that way. So what is the situation? What
is the task
Yes.
that you had to do to solve
Yes.
it? What actions
did you take, and what were the results? So that helps you, that forces you to talk about things in behavioral terms. And employers can really make determinations about who you are as an employee based on how you handle situations, how you talk about situations. So the more that you can focus on the behavioral aspects of these things, you can articulate that on your resume, and you can also articulate that in an interview.
So what behaviors would tell you someone's a good communicator? What are some few that come to mind.
Maybe being proactive. They're going out of their way to communicate before something happens.
Okay. Good. Active listening.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
On there. Adults.
Understanding body language, right? That was probably one of the things that was really difficult during the pandemic, is being able to. I know that at the
We have
beginning,
these,
everyone
yeah.
turned off their camera when they were meeting, and after a while, my boss was like, no, we need to be
To see-
visual, because you don't know if you're paying attention, if you're doing other things. The body language says a lot, right? When people's eyes are glaring, you know, okay, I need to stop talking now. You can read people's nonverbals. And so, some of the things that, and we'll share this as well. So how do you frame communication with respect to diversity of learning styles, varied individual communication abilities, and cultural differences? Do you write in all caps when you're doing email, right? That also can be interpreted as as you're shouting at someone, and very negative. And some people sometimes just have a habit of typing in all caps, but there's etiquette around how you communicate via email. I tend to, when I communicate with colleagues, hi, how are you? I hope you're doing well. Before I just blurt out what I'm asking, I usually try to have that formality with colleagues, and it's just my style of communicating. But, you know, it's important how you communicate. You know, email, and sometimes when I have to communicate a really strong message, it takes me hours to do. And people don't realize how much time it takes to really craft these messages that come out to campus or to go out to your colleagues. You have to really think about how people are going to receive it and what message you want to convey. So you have to be thoughtful about that.
Even times when I've told people who work for me, if the email gets too long, stop. Make a phone call. As even styles of communication, how it comes across, you know, got to break down those barriers. So there was another thing on this list: to ask appropriate questions for specific information from leaders, supervisors, other, you know, tuning in, considering perspectives, and being appropriate information.
And communicating in a clear, organized manner. How many people, do you know of anyone that you ask the question and they take you around to the whole story before they get to the point? So that can be distracting. Yes.
Something that we learned this year was for people who use screen readers. So in my job on campus, we create flyers and things for students. And we didn't even think about people who use screen readers. So when you do things in a circle, or you know, you try to reposition things to make it look pretty, the person using a screen reader is not, the screen reader just reads literally from left to right. So anything that you do to flourish or make it look prettier makes it more difficult for people with vision issues to read your message. And that was something that we hadn't even thought of.
That's such an important point, because it's also how our culture is shifting, because the more inclusive we become, the more we have to think from other perspectives. And our campus is going through a major shift with that very thing, that we like to create PDFs, you know, things that are online that are PDFs that. So you're absolutely great point, because there are so many dimensions to communication. Don't even think about.
And how difficult it was, right, for people who are deaf with masks, because they read lips. So what do you do? How do you? Okay, so the third competency is critical thinking, and we've been talking about critical thinking for many, many, many years, and it's one that's been on the list forever. And critical thinking is defined as identify and respond to needs based on an understanding of a situational context and logical analysis of relevant information. So it's how do you use all the pieces of information to solve a problem, basically. And that's why that communication piece is really important. You want to ask the right kinds of questions so that you can get all the pieces of information, all the data that you need to respond to the situation that you need to do.
I think the COVID crisis has brought this out more. Like I saw a very recent survey of employers, trends where like one of their number one trending things is that ability to think critically and creatively. But you think of the challenge that we've had and having to come up with alternative solutions, and you can't work rote, right? You've got to be a thinker and work through problems. And so we're seeing a surge, you know, where it used to be the top was teamwork or communication. Actually, it still tops, but that critical thinking and problem solving is surfacing even more in this era. So
Well, we
what,
wouldn't have
you
been
know,
able to get through COVID
right,
without
without it.
being able to problem solve and critically think about all of the situations that needed to be decided on, you know, how to get the campus to move from in-person to virtual in virtually no time, right? But there were a lot of decision making and a lot of people coming together to talk about, you know, how it affects different groups of people across the campus. So what are some behaviors, again, associated with critical thinking? And I think this is always a tough one, right? How would you describe critical thinking in a resume?
Lesson I've learned when, as an individual or a group, and you're facing a problem, I think one of the first steps, and possibly the hardest and most important step, is define the problem. You've got all these symptoms that you're dealing with, and to try to look underneath the covers to figure out what is the real root cause of this problem, so that therefore you can figure out how to address, to begin the solution to that problem. It might be easy and quick, it might take forever. But still, you got to be able to accurately define what the problem is before you can start solving it. And that process of discovery, finding, you got all this data out there, and that's where you've got to find what's called causal inference. Well, okay, I've got this data. Does that really accurately cause and infer why this other data is happening? You know, and that is a challenge to make sure it's not some other middle element or activity that's going on in there. Economics talks about this kind of thing a lot. This is such an important skill, because when you get in the military, when we would have to go through what's called crisis action planning, you've got a very short amount of time to figure out what you're going to do. And you can do some things just to try to stabilize the situation, but to solve the problem, you've got to go through a lot of steps with a lot of other people to evaluate what the real problem is. So that is a skill that I think everybody needs to do. But to get there, you got to step way back and be very open to what it could be.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And you have to be able to decipher what is good information and bad information. We're in an era where we have a plethora of information, but we don't necessarily know how to sort that. Like what's a good source, what's a poor source, and so being able to think critically about where the information is coming from online or open source. Is it because it's written? Is that define it as a good source? Or do you critically look at who the author is? It a legitimate organization? Is there, you know, there's some legitimacy to that? And I think we've struggled with that, I think, since the inception and the availability of the internet. People don't understand that it's really an open source place that anyone can just put any thoughts on. And just because it's written doesn't mean it's valid. So someone here said, Serena, optimizing processes and devising creative solution. Absolutely, that would be a great resume. And so an employer might then ask, okay, well, tell me what you mean by optimizing. How did you do that? In what situation were you able to optimize a procedure? And so, you know, you can be able to actually talk about that, right? Because it's a good verb to have.
There was a lot of, like in the NACE behaviors that they summarized, a lot has to do with thinking about diverse sets of sources Like you're not just looking at one source for information, to kind of get full perspective on a problem. And there was another about able to analyze data with awareness of your own personal biases so that they weren't playing into it. So I think those things are standing out too. Diverse perspectives.
Here it says effectively communicate actions and rationale. So do you know why you made that decision, right? Can you talk about what influenced your thinking and what data points really influenced the result or the decision that you made in that point?
There's one that they added that we kind of live it, we don't think about it. It's multitask well in a fast-paced environment. Does that speak to what we all experience? So if we're looking at, who's going to be successful as a grad, or they multitask well in a fast-paced environment. So,
Anyone else have anything they want to add? List of behavior? Go on. All right, the next one is equity and inclusion. And the definition is demonstrate the awareness, attitude, knowledge, skills required to equitably engage and include people from different local and global cultures, engage in anti-racist practices that actively challenge the systems, the structures, and policies of racism. I know this is I think is a new, or they reworded. I think they redid this one in NACE. It was diversity and inclusion before, but I don't think they included the anti-racism in there. So what are some behaviors that would show that you are competent in working with folks from diverse and you practice what are equity practices and inclusive practices that you can include in your resume?
Some that you sit on, or some, they call them work group subcommittees that you sit on.
certainly could be, if it's working toward an equitable cause, so that you're sitting there.
I think especially if you volunteer for organizations, NGOs, that are trying to help bring justice and equity to the marginalized. And you can demonstrate that you are part of that effort. Obviously, you're busy with school, taking care of yourself, learning and growing, but do you think beyond yourself?
So someone asked in the chat, would you provide a form with the key points of this webinar or some sort of a guide? Do you mind if we share the PowerPoint with them?
No, not at all. And then I have a handout.
Okay,
too.
great. So we'll share that with you all.
Also, the NACE site, there's a website that has all these outlined, so.
Send that to you, that PowerPoint. And so some of the things that NACE identified as behaviors would be solicit and use feedback from multiple cultural perspectives to make it inclusive. So on a resume, you might want to say change a particular process as in my work site, and I talked with I had a task force of different groups of folks from different backgrounds. And their input was used to do X, Y, Z. So I mean, you can be really specific about how it influenced your decision and how you were thoughtful enough to include them in the process and not include them for just because it's a good thing to do, but you actually was interested in, you were interested in learning why they thought the way they did and how that influenced your decision. And here they have find everything. Address systems of privilege that limit opportunities for members of historically marginalized communities. So if you're a supervisor, right, you would say, I purposely reached out to these particular groups and encouraged them to apply. I held, a small group of forums to help them understand what they needed to do to apply for the job or to assist them in any kind of way. I think there are ways that you can include that in a resume.
So earlier we had a description of cross-cultural interactions and experiences. You described it really well, being in another country and how you adapted. That's a perfect example of this area. And then it's also, they have identified resources that eliminate barriers resulting from individual and systemic racism, inequities, biases. So identifying resources and demonstrating flexibility by adapting to diverse environments. Heard some good examples.
So we'll move on because we're at 4:30. So leadership is recognize and capitalize on personal and team strengths to achieve organizational goals. That's the definition that they use. We have a lot of verbs that we use for leadership, right? I think that's one that's pretty well known. Inspire, persuade, motivate. How do you do that? How do you show that in the resume? Seek out and leverage diverse resources. Use innovative thinking to go beyond traditional methods. Plan, initiate, manage, complete, and evaluate projects. Those are some of the verbs that you can use when you describe leadership.
Role model.
Yes.
Motivate, plan, initiate. So that can be a pretty in-depth category in and of itself. But again, a key one, if you've done things, whether it's leading student organizations, and for you, maybe you have experience if you have led. Where as college educated people, we are leaders.
The next one is professionalism, and I will say that from a multicultural perspective or a diverse perspective, this could be a really touchy one, because professionalism sometimes can be seen as the eye of the beholder, right? It could be really extremely paternalistic in terms of who defines who's professional or not. And I know in the past year, there have been a lot of discussions around hair, like Black women and hair in the workplace, where women were forced to either wear a wig, or something that wasn't their natural hair in order to look professional. They were told they're not professional with their hair. And so we don't mean professionalism in that regard, not from a sort of a white-centered perspective, but it's understanding the environments and what is expected in terms of behavior. How do you socialize people to be effective in that workspace, and not judging them for how they look, how they speak, how they act. Maybe their interaction might be a little different. It's not that at all, but understanding what the expectations are in the workplace. So it's knowing work environments differ greatly, understand and demonstrate effective work habits, and act in the interest of the larger community and workplace. So they really focus on behaviors that are not, attached to any individual or individuals or group of people in terms of how they look or act.
I often think of, if we think about our profession, right, there's commitment behind it. Like there are certain behaviors and standards because of our profession. Take it seriously, and we take that organization seriously. So I think of it as driven by more the commitment to it, and not some standard that personalized, right, per se. So that's really what it has been. But some of the, let's perhaps you have ideas. What are some examples of to see performance indicators of professionalism?
What would be some things that you would put on your
resume or an interview, or if you were observing and saying, oh, this person is worthy of promotion?
I think time management, deadlines that you have to follow for projects, also showing up to meetings on time, being prepared.
Yes.
I find with a lot of professional leaders, what they show is humility. They do not lord over, I am the leader, therefore do what I say. It's more, okay, I am by title a leader, but I want to include everybody in this process and decisions and actions that we need to do so that everybody feels included. Going back to one of your other inclusions, but as a professional, you got to know the technique of your, whatever your subject profession is. That's half the battle. You simply got to study and practice to know the tools and techniques of your profession, whatever it is. That's a big part of it. About another 25% of it is people have got to like you. I mean, if you behave in a way that people don't like you, you can be partially successful, but not very successful. Because remember, your reputation is what they say after you leave the room. So, and that's one thing you can't buy. You cannot buy your reputation. Your reputation is something you're going to earn by your behavior. So keep that in mind and think of examples of, the good, bad, and ugly that you've experienced of other so-called professionals, how they've behaved and treated you. And then also that they are consistent, that they don't preach one thing and behave another way. So they walk the walk and they talk the talk at the same time and in the same way.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You said a lot of the verbs that show up here. Consistently meet, exceed goals. Know the business, right? If you're going into a business that you're not sure of, make sure you walk into that interview prepared and you know what that business is, because they're going to ask you. Now, you may have general experiences, but if you go in knowing the business and you can apply what you've experienced into what you think, you always want to provide the value added at a job interview. So you want to be present, prepared. You want to maintain a positive personal brand. What do you look like online? What's your LinkedIn look like? What's your Facebook? I know there was, well, I think they still do. People do searches, public searches for employees to see what do they do on their own. We saw a lot of that, I think, during COVID, where people were getting fired for behaviors and some of the extracurricular activities that really they participated on their personal time. That's a little funny, but I mean,
Detracting from
absolutely. I mean,
the company.
the company, that's not the brand that they want. They will definitely push you out if you don't necessarily meet what what it is they want.
The whole concept also, packaging,
Yes.
it's like you're bringing your whole self to it.
Teamwork, and the definition of teamwork is build and maintain collaborative relationships to work effectively toward common goals while appreciating diverse viewpoints and shared responsibilities. I think we talked a little bit about that before. A lot of organizations are focused on teams, and if you can't work with other people, you're not going to do well. Just like as the gentleman said, your reputation is how you establish those relationships. And those relationships build networks, and those networks grow. And you never know, you don't burn a bridge because you never know when you're going to run into them again. You may need them later on. So always be kind and treat people with respect and be your best self all the time.
So as we think about that and teamwork, what you were overseeing or looking at performance indicators, what would be examples of teamwork, real effective teamwork? What you said, I know that player.
Okay, emotional intelligence, managing your own emotions.
Giving credit to other people, right? Especially if you're the team leader, you want to make sure that you don't take all the credit and that you give people their due respect and credit. You collaborate well. So collaboration is a good verb to use on your relationship. Being accountable. How accountable are you to your team? How do you manage conflict?
Play off the strengths of other team members. Strengths and how they complement each other. Some other things we hear a lot from employers about agility right now, ability to compromise and be agile. High in some of our employers we deal with, and especially probably now in the environments we're in now. And building strong relationships, we talked about that too. So last but not least,
Yes,
technology.
So it's understand and leverage technologies ethically to enhance efficiencies, complete tasks, and accomplish goals. Can't do anything without technology. And so it's important to be able to discuss or put on your resume what kinds of things you do with technology. What are some behaviors that might be associated with someone understanding that you understand technology very well? Yes. You might be specific in terms of what those tools are. A lot of companies like to know exactly what skills you have and what particular.
One thing I do is, University of Nevada at Reno, their social science department has a program when the pandemic hit out, it's called NEST, N-E-S-T. I don't recall what those letters stand for, but what the program essentially did is they discovered that very quickly, because everybody was forced to do everything over the internet, a lot of people, especially older seniors, simply didn't know how to work the internet. They were stopped dead in their tracks.
Mhm.
So they were looking for volunteers, students, who could simply not meet face to face, but call on the phone and help seniors with the simplest problems. How do I send an email? How do I download or make a PDF file? How do I get on a Zoom call with somebody because I want to talk to my family or people or something? And when you have to teach somebody over the phone who is not familiar or comfortable with technology, I got this laptop, I know how to turn it on and that's it. Now what do I do? And to take time to patiently work them through that. And remember, all you're hearing is what they tell you on the phone. You don't see what they're doing. You don't see, now they can try to read you and then they're reading you every word on the screen and you're trying to imagine what their stumbling block is. But it's sort of a very grassroots level experience as to what technology can and can't do and how user-friendly it is. But it also made me appreciate how important it is for so many people that, I mean, they got stuck down. I need to apply for unemployment. They want a document. I don't know where to get it and how to send it in. I can't figure out why my web router keeps falling offline and I can't, stay connected and do the things I need to do. So it's simply, again, reaching beyond yourself to help those who do not have the technology experience, to help them through those problems. It's been a difficult but a rich experience. I mean, last week I spent 3 hours on the phone trying to help a woman who sadly, she had some medical procedure, it hurt her cognitive abilities, and she knew it. And I also very quickly learned, don't give up on her, or she's going to feel like she's fallen into the rabbit hole, she can't do anything. So I stayed with her to do the simplest thing of how to, because she had all this junk mail popping up on her screen all the time, how to download and use what's called CCleaner program to clean all the pop-ups and browsers and everything else that was creating pain for her. So she's extremely thankful that I did that for her. But that was 3 hours of my life that I had to give to solve one relatively simple problem. If I was sitting there with her, we could have done it in 10 minutes. But
Yeah, that is a communication thing, and that's it kind of goes beyond. So, and we have a lot in the chat here demonstrating and
history for providing examples of the ability to integrate teamwork-driven activities.
Variety of technologies, yeah, and then it's also just being willing to learn new technologies, and also it's learning how to apply them effectively, right? I know in my profession, I'm bombarded with software packages. We've got to sift through things and figure out what is the most beneficial to use, right? So it's also that, right? Figuring out how to use it effectively, what to use.
Some of the statements in that NACE talks about is navigating change and being open to learning new technologies. Using technology to improve efficiency and productivity. So you can actually, that's an actual situation, right, that you can talk about if that's what you did. And I mean, I kind of have a story there, but I know we're running out of time. Identify appropriate technology for completing tasks. Managing technology to integrate information to support relevant, effective, and timely decision-making. Quickly adapt to new and unfamiliar technologies and then manipulate information, construct ideas, and use technology to achieve strategic goals. And so you can talk about those situations and how you did it pretty easily, I think, if you can think about it in actionable terms. So I know we spent a lot of time on this, and we're kind of going to go through some tips that we have for you. Do we have any questions before we move on? Okay. So one of the things that we've been doing at UNLV, because we realize the importance of students having and developing these competencies, is we've identified core competencies at UNLV. And we worked with Eileen and I, we co-chair a workforce task force, and we've identified these 6 competencies and related skills as core competencies. And we're going to start introducing these, I think, next semester. We've developed badges to help students, their web campus modules that connect to LinkedIn Learning. And if you do so many, you earn badges. And right now, badges will be in Canvas, but we hope to be able to integrate once we have the full version of Badger. The students who earn these badges are able to display them on LinkedIn. So it signals to employers, first of all, that you've taken the extra initiative to become proficient, and it's really knowledge level, but that you're trying to become aware of the importance of these competencies. But there are other ways that you can practice them as well.
So I think you'll recognize what we've already talked about. One of you mentioned emotional intelligence, and that's a dimension of the communication skills and leadership skills that is
Yes.
critically important, and we think our students, should be known for that, especially with often the areas. And the other one you'll see is cultural intelligence, which in our office, we have an expert in that. But it's really not just looking at understanding diversity, but how do you, perform in those environments. So it looks at drive, knowledge, and action around
Right.
Your cultural knowledge. And how do you work in companies, right? And be in Thailand and be effective. Right? That's cultural intelligence. So.
All right, so how do you assess your skills? And there are skill assessments. I have here myindeed.com, and they were readily available. The other link on the bottom there is www.123test.com. Have some free competencies that you can kind of assess your skills, your strengths and weaknesses, and you can do that on your own time. But it's really important to be honest with yourself, right? Explore services offered by the UNLV Career Services Office. They offer resume tips. They help you
Interview prep.
They do interview prep. There's a ton of services that the Office of Career Services offers. Engage in career mapping, and career mapping is really about creating a map. It requires significant amount of research, knowing all the opportunities for advancement. So it helps you define the steps of where you want to go and things that you need to do in the interim, and then you can be very intentional of how you prepare for that and seek out experiences that allow you to develop the kind of skills that you need to get to that position.
I was just going to say, one of the things that I have found when you talk about that, I used to tell people, sometimes our students, like, I really want to work for this company. I want to work for Disney. I want to do this. You go on LinkedIn and look for that person that works there and then look at the pattern of their experience. And you'll often find how they've scaffolded to get there. So there's multiple ways to do the mapping. It can sometimes be simple, the things you wouldn't ordinarily think about. There's clues, kind of hidden clues there.
And I attended the Wall Street Journal job skills. It was a summit, and I think it's coming up in October 5th. And I like to go because I get to hear sort of what are the trends for employers right now. And they gave some really great tips. And one of them, as Eileen said, is, think about what you want to do and try to network with those people on LinkedIn. Talk to them, ask questions. Most professionals are really open to talking about their stories and what they did to get there. Find mentors and try to get as much experience, even if you volunteer. Understand that experience counts as well, even on your resume. Know what you want to do and or where you want to end up. Become familiar with job specifications or required competencies, and a lot of jobs are listing those right now. Make a list of all your skills, determine where the gaps are, and then make a plan to close those gaps. So there's lots of resources available. Coursera is free. You can do courses there. LinkedIn Learning is something that you get for free as a student here. And so there are many, many, many courses that you can take on LinkedIn.
So given that we're short on, you had another, we'll
Yeah.
do this and this.
So just some tips for gaining, again, just learn about the competencies most valued in your discipline. And then take advantage of professional development and indicate that in your resume. That says a lot to the employer looking at your resume. Earn additional credits. So if you know your company has a really big visibility online, Google offers social media professional. Learn how to market that. If you can say, hey, I also, in addition to my technical background, I can also do social media communication. That's a value added that someone else may not have. And so you have to figure out ways to distinguish yourself from other candidates. Again, Google and Coursera offer industry recognized credentials. Call attention to your important achievements on your resume and determine the additional certifications value. And there are places for that. I think Indeed lists that. If you look at the Indeed and the salaries, it'll tell you what certifications those employers look for. So we have an activity.
So I'll describe, because this is something you can do on your own.
Yes.
Since we wouldn't have time, but basically what you do, just go to any one of these, and there's more than one job search site. If you're not aware, the campus has handshake.com, and Handshake is a platform that's for college talent. And so you're talking about thousands of universities use this platform, and then it allows companies to go in and find college educated talent from universities and alumni by searching. And they basically decide to align with certain campuses like UNLV and then post their positions. So it's anything from internships, full-time jobs, and there are also community networks on it. But you can use that platform. It's free to you as a UNLV student, where you just activate, and then it helps you match with employers. There's LinkedIn, there's Indeed, there's, if you're higher ed jobs, there's, things that are very specific. But go in, find a job that's your dream job. Go look, find the title that you would be really aspiring to, and look at the job description, but particularly pay attention to anything that lists skills, qualifications. I don't mean necessarily, PhD, bachelor's, but the job responsibilities that would indicate what kind of competencies and skills you need. And then do a little self-analysis. Where are you strong? Where do you feel you're really strong in those areas? And where you could say, hey, I've demonstrated this. And what's missing? Are there things that you're missing, or skills and competencies that you say, oh, to this level, I need to develop it more? And that kind of becomes your self-analysis of, where am I at? And then we were going to do a group, like kind of thinking about how do you get those? You know, if you feel like you have gaps, how can we help you think about how you go about getting those? And that could be micro credentials. It could be a volunteer experience. There are multiple ways to move forward in your career. And we're certainly open to discussing that. If this is an exercise you want to do and you want to follow up with the Career Services Office and process that with me or Nevina or any of us, right? So that's kind of, and then this last piece is a fascinating one. We need to blow up that map so that you start to understand it.
So this is a report, I think I did this in a previous thing. It's my favorite, I'm a workforce development person, so my favorite center to get information, and they really do just-in-time research, is Georgetown University Workforce on Education and the Workforce. The link to the report is there. And what they did was look at competencies. I think one of the learning outcomes was understanding what competencies are valued in my industry. So what they did was they looked at the competencies, they got information from employers, and then they ranked them based on these industries here. So STEM fields, managerial, professional office, and healthcare, professional and technical. So what you can see is across the top, communication, and this was just done in 2020, so it's not that old. Communication is top for every single one of those industries. And then the mapping piece, the lines that you see are how they track. So let's say teamwork, where it's number 2 in managerial and professional, it's number 6 in STEM and number 4 in healthcare. So it kind of traces in what order, what are the priorities of these. And there's a whole 30, 40 page report that you can download for free through the Center on Education and the Workforce. So that's just just a picture of how they organize. This is a graphic organizer of how they came out, but it's fascinating. So that's a resource there's for you too. So every sector, every industry has their values. And always be career focused. Like, don't procrastinate. Don't think that this is something you do in your junior year. Sometimes it's too late. And always have a growth mindset, because just like how we had to pivot during the pandemic, you're going to end up pivoting quite a bit in your career as well. Very few people retire from the same career they started in. Those opportunities are changing, and so pivoting is actually a skill, right? How do you take your experience and pivot into something different? I think the UNLV newsletter just this week had a story about a gentleman who was an engineer who pivoted into marketing in Credit Karma, and how he could use his engineering skills and be successful in the marketing world, even though he didn't know anything about marketing. And he talked about how important it was to work with people in the field and ask them questions and find mentors and attend conferences, and aware that he was not strong in that, but willing to be vulnerable and talk to people about where his gap and skills were. So take advantage of learning opportunities. There's so many resources on campus.
And one of the things, while you're talking about that very quickly, I left these, if you want to grab them, because we have an upcoming career fair. We have one day that's virtual to interact with employers, and then 3 days STEM, all industry, which is business, hospitality, and nonprofits. These employers, it's bringing a resource directly to you, so that you can enter dialogues and find out, how are people career pathing. It's also about building relationships with these employers for the future. So I don't want you to feel like people don't have to be job searching. They just need to be curious and prospecting and exploring. And then sometimes, opportunities just come your way.
And don't underestimate the people who are there. So we had a meeting just last week with some employers, and they said, hey, we hire marketing people, and we're a hospitality industry. So understand that organizations have all kinds of professions, and just because you might not be hospitality doesn't mean that you can't work for MGM. They have engineers. They have professional people as well. Then they
have
need
social workers.
absolutely counselors, and so just be open. Excuse me. Keep a pulse of the job market and trends in the workplace. I mean, pandemic has really kind of opened up that.
Different.
Yes, absolutely.
Remote work, I mean, who knows? Yeah.
Keep learning and building your experience, reflect, and network is the bottom one. I don't think you see it there. So, just again, be engaged, understand, and know yourself, and take advantage of every single opportunity you can, even in the volunteer space. So, your work with the woman and would have been really beneficial, right, for a young person who may not have done that before. So those you don't minimize those kinds of experiences. They all matter. All right, so questions for us. Oh, there's another activity. Yes.
What advice do you have for people who feel a bit unsure? You head over to things like career mapping. You're like, yeah, I'm kind of sure I want to do this, but I'm not completely sure I want to do this. I mean, there's so much pressure to pick a field and just do it. I mean, what kind of advice do you have for people?
For one, there are some things that we can do with assessments. If those tools are and they're helpful in the context of having more conversation about what's impacting you. So that's one way. The other is if you have a hunch, like you kind of know some general directions. One is also to see what's out there. Like literally look for jobs when you're not job searching. Like, does that capture my imagination? Is that interesting? And the other thing is to find ways to test things out in a very small way. To put where you don't have that full investment. We just heard from someone who said he was set on being a doctor, and then just had the experience with their parents in the hospital, and all of a sudden it illuminated what it was, and it wasn't going to be for her. But you have to test things out, try things, or to even be in environments with people in those professions. I know I went a different direction than a business degree. It's like I didn't feel like I fit the environment.
I did the same. Yeah, I kind of fell into this and realized it was something I was really good at. So you have to know your passions too. I mean, one of the things, I think, pay attention to the things you gravitate to. I used to tell doctoral students that, what is it that you want to study? And pay attention, write down things that you tend to gravitate to. That's usually something that definitely interests you. So figure out where that is, and then figure out how you can work in that area. Like, what are some areas that help you? What are some organizations that you might be able to do that kind of work?
It's also with purpose. But what do you want to solve problems in the world? How do you want to make an impact? Want to make a difference? Constantly thinking that we use a concept called designing your life, because things are iterative. You don't just go, oh, this is it, let me go, I'm there. Because we're always weaving our way through. And our assistant director, who's not with us the full semester right now and got pulled away, but he's done a lot of work on that. So we're hoping to do more work with you. But it's out of Stanford, and there are books on this, and so it's kind of a good thing to get used to, because it really has you kind of, what were you doing when you were most energized? It has you go through some of those processes to kind of hone in on things and sort of navigate your way.
And I'd say ask other people.
Yeah.
People saw something in me, in terms of my career, and told me I should go for a PhD. I had no idea what that was. And I remember my master's advisor said, you should do the PhD in workforce development. I said, what? And I said, well, first of all, I hate writing, so I don't see myself doing a PhD. Well, I mean, because I respected her, I went ahead and applied and got in. It was the only place I applied to, but I got in. And it turned out, I was miserable for the first 3 months, but it turned out that when I really understood what I was in, I was like, oh, this is exactly where I need to be. And so sometimes you just kind of fall into it, but people sometimes see things in you too. So go to people you trust and ask them, what do you see my strengths are in? And again, be open to that feedback. try to do volunteer experiences in areas that you think you might want to go into. That's a great way to learn. I know that we're limited in time as your student, but
Does anyone have any last questions in the chat? Feel free to unmute yourself or type anything in there. Well, before we wrap up, I just want to give a huge thank you to both of you, Cecilia and
Thank you.
Annie. Thank you for being here and sharing your expertise with us. This was super informative. And thank you all for joining us virtually and in person. See you at the next one. Hope everyone has a good day.
thank you for joining us.
Thank you.